information or the first byte that gets served, and then everything else will obviously follow after that. So if your time to first byte is, let's say, 1.2 seconds, there's a very slim chance that you're going to get your website loading in 2 or 3 seconds, because you've already wasted 1.2 seconds before that is. So I'll kind of show you some examples of how that runs a little bit later, possibly. Next thing we can discuss is WordPress configuration. So making sure that your WordPress website is set up correctly, you're not redirecting 100 things around, that you have decent caching set up and things like that, which we'll run through some WordPress configuration things a little bit later. But the second factor there is making sure that your WordPress site is actually optimized as well as it can be. Third thing would be page size, and this encompasses like everything that's on your page, how many scripts you have, how many images you have, the size of those images, and things like that. So page size is a very large one. Sometimes you have control over it, not always you have control, but it depends how much of a developer you are, or how much sort of control that you want to give over that, and what sort of theme or plugins that you're using in order to control that. You could chuck in a caching plugin which will bring your page size down. You could bring an image compression script in or plugin in to bring that down as well. You can generally get, with those two options, you can generally bring most page sizes down. But if your code is pulling through like the full image in your WordPress code, then if you've uploaded a 2 megabyte full image, and instead of bringing through, say a 300 by 300 image, you're bringing through 1024 by 1024 image, then that's going to be a hell of a lot slower. So there's things like that you can control within code to bring your page size down. All right, so, and pour on too many plugins. So generally most decent plugins will load their scripts on the pages where they need to be loaded on. Let's say you have a contact form on your contact page. There's no point loading the contact page script across your other additional pages, because there's no need for that to happen. Sometimes, you might be looking at loading Font Awesome 3 or 4 times, depending on different plugins. So there's additional calls that are happening from the server to a third-party server, which need to be returned in order for that to happen. So auditing the number of plugins that you have and the calls that those plugins make can bring your page size down and your website speed up, as well as any external scripts as well. I would say 9 out of 10 people, probably more, would be using Google Analytics, and that's basically 1 or 2 scripts you're using Google Fonts. So let's say you're using Google Fonts and Google Analytics. There's 3 scripts that you're pulling through from an external source. If you are then using 5 or 6 different fonts, all those are probably about 200 kilobytes each. So by just loading, a bold, let's say a regular and a light font, you're looking maybe 600 kilobytes to bring that in, plus 3 external scripts. So while it's nice to have a lot of choice, you have to kind of weigh up what's going to be the most beneficial for your server. And there's a few optimizations that you can do with that. You can load them locally instead of loading them on Google Fonts, and you can cache those on a CDN and a few other things as well. But those are kind of the main points that we'll go through in terms of ways to bring your WordPress website load time down. All right, so Robert hasn't mentioned anything previously. So like I mentioned before, with shared hosting, you're sharing your resources with hundreds of other sites on the same server. So look into a managed hosting provider or a cloud hosted provider where you can have dedicated resources. So if you were to use something like DigitalOcean, which may require a little bit of setup, then what they're giving you is they're giving you a small space on a large server. So let's say you've got the entry-level plan, which is $5 or $10. What they'll give you is one virtual CPU and a small amount of virtual RAM, but that's dedicated to you. So if you end up using all of that space, or end up using all of that space of RAM, of memory, or your CPU, then your website runs slow, but it doesn't really affect anybody else on the same server. That's kind of how they look at optimizing it. So it's somewhat dedicated, or a virtual private server, or a virtual cloud server. If you're looking to a managed hosting provider, someone like WP Engine, Kinsta, or Flywheel, then at the entry-level plans, they're still shared plans, but they're generally going to be on better quality hardware. So you'd use something like Google Cloud, and instead of shoving 300 servers on 300 sites on there, they might have 20 to 50. So you are paying for additional services there as with the hosting. So you'll be getting a CDN, you'll be getting SSL, and a few other things there as well. Their support team is probably more likely to be able to help you optimize and debug some things. You'll get access to staging servers as well. So really kind of check out your budget and see what you have there. SiteGrounds, there's a question in from Frank about SiteGround. So we use SiteGround and have for a while now. We've sort of gone a little bit away from them personally in the last little while. Their shared platform is basically what used to be just a generic cPanel access. They've developed their own platform, which is really good actually, but none of their resources are actually specifically dedicated to running a WordPress site that I know. If you run a Joomla site and you run a WordPress site, there's no additional optimization besides their caching plugin that would make one site better than the other. Their VPS server is okay, their dedicated servers are okay, although just recently I've migrated a few clients away to Cloudways and for their own DigitalOcean servers, just because whenever we were getting into some issues, their main recourse was for us to get us to upgrade the server, and generally it's not always the case just to throw more resources at something. You can plug in a whole bunch of tools in order to work out where the issue will be, but if you have a memory leak somewhere in your site, more resources are just going to delay the same issue from happening later. So a few times we actually chuck on something like Cloudflare in between. So yeah, prefer a VPS or a cloud server over someone like a shared server like Vodian or SiteGround or even Bluehost. Bluehost is reasonably cheap hosting. It works okay, but again, you sort of get what you pay for. And if you're looking at running a very large site, then you're not going to want to be hosting it on those servers. So just test it. If you can set up a trial account, then then do that. But yeah, I'd recommend something like WP Engine, Kinsta, which are both Google Cloud, or Flywheel, which used to be DigitalOcean backend, but I'm not sure where their backend is now. Yeah, you can go back and run your own Lightspeed server or something like that, which is what I do with my sites, but that's sort of getting into a little bit more. Yeah, you'd be looking at something like Nginx, Redis cache, and a few things like that. So I won't delve too much into the server specs of it, but yeah, that's sort of something to look into anyway. And if Robert sort of turns up, then we can go into a bit more detail. Otherwise, I'll kind of wing it. I've been configuring some servers for some clients lately. So, all right, let's kind of go into a few steps. So, optimizing WordPress in some easy steps, right? So, it can be kind of scary for beginners. So, what we'll do is we'll run through a few ways that we can speed up your site with basically just a few things. And most of that comes into basically running some plugins. All right, so the very basics of WordPress, their websites are essentially dynamic, which means that you've got some code on your server, which basically sits there, and then if 600 people come to your website, then each of those 600 people are getting a dynamic version of the website, which means that there's at least 600 calls to the database. There's 600 calls to, loading all these different functions, loading all these JavaScript, CSS files, images, and things like that. So depending on your server, 600 people could actually time out and make your website run really, really slow without a cache, because it's essentially dynamically loading everything the whole time that everyone comes into your website. So the basics around adding a cache would basically mean that the visitor gets a cached or a HTML generated version of that page. So if 600 people came to my website with a cache on, they would all get the same version of that page. So it's basically stored on the server and is rendered back to the user as a static HTML page, but has been dynamically loaded once from the server. So most caching plugins will actually go and, over the course of 5, 10, 24 hours, generate new HTML pages. Or if you update your homepage, update one of your blog posts, then typically those will be regenerated for you as well. So it basically brings down the load on the server because you're not actually loading anything specific or hard for the database, nothing dynamic. That can cause some problems depending on the nature of your website. So for e-commerce, you don't want to be caching your checkout or your cart page. Sometimes you don't want to be caching a contact page or a comment section or a forum. So there's some things to think about there. And generally most cache plugins will allow you to sort of exclude certain pages or exclude certain scripts and things like that you might be having problems with. So some hosts like SiteGround will actually come with a cache plugin. WP Engine come with one that's not a plugin, but it's just built into your system. Cloudways will give you something like Breeze. And then if you are rolling your own server, you would use something like Lightspeed, which has a very good cache plugin that you can use. So a few options here. I mean, there's plenty. I won't go into them in too much detail, but there's WP Rocket, which is a premium plugin written by a French company that's been around for quite a while. It's probably not the most powerful plugin, but it's really easy to use. It can, with a matter of sort of 5 or 10 clicks, you can pretty much get a fast running website with most of their options basically out of the box, and they are including sort of more and more things over time. The WP Supercache plugin is a free option from Automatic, and that's a static cache generator. There's also WP Fastest Cache, which is good as well. So there's a couple of free options. There is Auto Optimize, which is kind of less cache and more optimizing your scripts and kind of combining them together. I do believe they have an integration with WP Optimize, I think, which is kind of their caching solution. So if you didn't want to necessarily run a cache, but you wanted to compress all your scripts together and have them load, then you can look at Auto Optimize. But I find sometimes with that in Auto Optimize, then you'll generally get quite a large cache, and it's kind of one cache file rather than lots of different sort of mini caches. Swift Performance is a really good plugin as well. The light version is free, and there's a premium version as well. There's lots and lots of different settings in Swift Performance, so if you know what you're doing, then it's definitely worth looking into. And they had a lifetime deal, I think this time last year, which I picked up. So if you kind of know what you're doing and you want fine control, then something like Swift Performance will give you a lot more options over something like WP Rocket, where you only really have 10 or 15 options. Again, so on the same level of Swift Performance, you have Lightspeed Cache, and it does work across any provider, So if you're running Nginx, or if you're running Apache, or if you're running any other servers, then basically you can kind of run from there. I do recommend it if you are using a Lightspeed server. It does have a few built-in options for there as well. I think it has a CDN option and a few others there as well to improve your piece side. Quick question here from JK. Is it good to combine WP Rocket and Auto Optimize? I don't think there's any need to. WP Rocket will basically do what Auto Optimize does, inbuilt into it already, whereas Supercache and Fastest Cache probably don't have the same type of control as Auto Optimize. In terms of Hummingbird by WPMU Dev, I haven't used it personally. I've kind of steered away from the WPMU plugins, but maybe somebody else has a bit of experience with it that they can help you in the chat. And then finally, the last option that I like to do is Cloudflare. So Cloudflare, it's not really a caching system, although they have come out with a dynamic cache lately. Cloudflare is basically a CDN, or a content delivery network, distribution network, that allows you to basically sit in front of your website server. So from the DNS level, it'll hit your Cloudflare server, it'll do some caching at that server, and then it will go through onto your website server. So if you get 1,000 visitors, then Cloudflare is taking the brunt of that traffic and also feeding out bad traffic and distributing your content across the world with their CDN network as well. So for example, I host a couple of sites that are Bitcoin, or sort of Bitcoin sites basically, so news sites. They get quite a lot of hack attempts on them. So what we do, or if we're hosting event-based websites or anything like that, what we'll do is we'll put Cloudflare out in front. Generally the paid version, but the free version works generally for most of our sites. So it's a great DNS control. So we'll put that out in front, and therefore a lot of that bad traffic that hits the server never gets through to the actual web server. So you're never running out of PHP, or memory on that point, because we can block it directly from Cloudflare. So most of my clients will be on the Cloudflare free plan, which is generally perfect. You get 3-page rules. You get most of the caching, optimization, and speed optimization from there. The $20 plan is generally pretty good. Depends on the level of control that you want. You really have to sort of go into it. Sometimes we have clients on the business plan, but that's about $200 per month. But they kind of need that additional control. So we can do things like blocking all traffic from Russia, blocking all traffic from China. We had, this other site, which is this altcoin site that we have. They were getting 1.5 million hits in the course of like 2 to 3 hours. So for that was basically us monitoring all that traffic, blocking specific IPs that were trying to smash the site and take it down. So without something like Cloudflare or a firewall sitting in front of it, the website would just go down. So while we've gone on to sort of the other side of speed optimization, chucking Cloudflare on just at a DNS level is fantastic. And it also does CNAME flattening, which is good. Allison's quick question here. If we're using the CDN on WP Engine, is it enough? Do we still need a caching plugin? So if you're using WP Engine, then they actually will cache everything for you. If you're so you don't need to worry too much about that. If you're using CDN, it's a little bit different. So CDN is basically making sure that your content is available worldwide. So if I'm visiting your website server, let's say it's based in Taiwan, and I'm visiting it from Brazil, then most likely you'll be serving me assets from, let's say, Argentina, or from the US, or from Mexico. So it's geologically closer to me, so therefore it should be faster. So that's the benefit of a CDN. If you're only serving clients in one market, let's say you're only serving clients in Singapore, then a CDN's not really going to help you, and it can sometimes cause some delays in that CDN being refreshed, and some people might be getting some outdated content. So make sure you test it. Test it on GT metrics, test it in your browser. Are you getting a better or a slower response? And then work it out from there. All right, so on page image optimization, this is probably the biggest area that most people kind of forget. Let's say you're using stock images and you grab something from iStock Photo. It's a nice photo, or even Unsplash, right? It's Unsplash, it's free, and you get something, 4,000 pixels by 1,800 pixels, right? It's a nice widescreen image that you want to use as your header banner. Typically what people do is they'll download that image and then just chuck it straight up to WordPress and then load that image in. If that hasn't gone through any type of optimization, then that image could be 6 or 7 megabytes. WordPress itself will create 3 or 4 different versions of those. They'll do like a large, a medium, and a thumbnail. Thumbnail is 150 by 150, which is tiny and generally not much use at all. The medium is 300 by 300, which is generally not much use at all either. And then the large is 124 by 124. They also have 2 other sizes, which I think is 1536 and 2048 or something, kind of random sizes that they will optimize down to. So you could be loading like really huge images across your site, which is never a great idea. So one thing we can look at is making sure that you're using the right image as well. So we find sometimes that people upload a PNG version of a photo, which is generally a bad idea. A couple of simple rules is basically if your photo has lots of different colors, then use a JPEG. If it's a simple image like a logo or like a 2 or 3 color image, then use PNGs, they'll be fine. But also have a look at the file, save both, have a look on your desktop and see what's the larger file size. If you're a little bit savvier and you're working with vectors, then use SVGs over PNGs for logos. Just means that you can expand or to track that without losing too much quality. In order to upload SVGs into WordPress, you can use either Safe SVG or there's another plugin as well. So just have a look into SVGs when you look in the repository. That just gives you a little bit more access to upload those, then you can use those as images basically. So some plugins will also allow you to convert your images to WebP, which is a relatively new format which Google really loves. It's basically an optimized JPEG format. I don't remember if it has transparency into it or not, but it's basically an optimized image format. And if you're using something like Imagify, Smush, or ShortPixel, right? Thanks, Tom. Does have transparency. If you're using ShortPixel or Imagify or Smush or something like that, it'll generally create those, or even the Lightspeed plugin as well will be able to create those WebP versions of the images for you, and then serve those. So if someone's browsing from Google Chrome, they will get a WebP version, and then the JPEG version is still being served to other browsers that don't support it. I'm trying to remember who doesn't support it. I think it's just Firefox at this stage. I'm pretty sure the new Safari supports it. But, you talk about 90% of the web being on Google Chrome or a variation of Chrome anyway, even Microsoft Edge nowadays. So they should all be sort of supported. And if it doesn't cost you anything in terms of conversion, then it's a good option to have. Typically, it's just a checkbox, and then it will run through and convert all your images for you. So have a look into those. If